Picture this: a dimly lit monastery in the heart of medieval Europe, where the only sound is the faint scratch of a quill against parchment. A lone scribe bends over his work, his face illuminated by the fragile glow of a single candle. For hours, days, even years, he labors, transforming blank pages into dazzling works of art adorned with gold leaf and vibrant colors. These weren't just books, they were masterpieces, each stroke of the pen a testament to patience, faith, and an almost unimaginable level of skill. But behind their beauty lay a world of danger where one wrong move could mean disaster. This is the story of Illuminated Manuscripts, where artistry and peril walked hand in hand. What drove these scribes to dedicate their lives to such painstaking work? The answer lies in the very essence of the Middle Ages, a time when books were rare treasures and the written word held sacred power. Illuminated manuscripts were more than just texts. They were physical embodiments of devotion, meant to glorify God and inspire awe. Every flourish of gold, every intricate border, was an act of reverence. But creating them was no simple task. Scribes worked with materials that could poison them, in conditions that pushed their eyes and bodies to the limit. And all of it was done under the unreliable light of candles, where a single moment of carelessness could reduce years of work to ashes. Yet, despite the risks, they persisted. The allure of creating something timeless, something that would outlast them, was too powerful to resist. Today, we can only marvel at their dedication and the incredible legacy they left behind. These manuscripts are windows into a world where art and danger were inseparable, where every page tells a story not just of faith and beauty, but of human endurance. So let's step into the scribe's shoes, into that flickering candlelight, and uncover the secrets of how these stunning works were made and the hidden costs behind their creation. By the end of this journey, you'll never look at an illuminated manuscript the same way again. To understand why these scribes poured their lives into such meticulous work, we have to step back into the early medieval world, a time when books were more than just objects. They were sacred vessels carrying the weight of divine wisdom and human knowledge. In an age before mass printing, every single book had to be crafted by hand, letter by letter, line by line. And among these, illuminated manuscripts stood apart, not just as texts but as radiant works of art, glowing with gold and vivid pigments. Their origins trace back to the quiet solitude of monastic scriptoria, where monks saw their labor as a form of prayer. Each stroke of the pen wasn't just copying words. It was an act of devotion, a way to honor God through beauty and precision. But the creation of these manuscripts wasn't just about spirituality. It was also a response to the fragility of knowledge itself. In a world where wars, invasions, and time itself could erase entire libraries, scribes became the guardians of culture. They preserved everything from religious scriptures to ancient philosophy, ensuring that wisdom wouldn't be lost to the shadows of history. And because these books were so precious, they were made to last, bound in sturdy covers, written on durable parchment, and decorated with materials meant to endure. Gold leaf, for instance, wasn't just for show. It symbolized the divine light of heaven, a fitting adornment for sacred texts, yet the process was grueling. Imagine spending 12 hours a day in a dimly lit room, your eyes straining under the flicker of candlelight, your hand cramping as you painstakingly formed each letter. A single mistake could mean starting an entire page over, or worse, ruining expensive materials, and the pigments themselves were often dangerous, made from toxic substances like mercury sulfide for red or arsenic-based greens. Scribes worked knowing that their craft could literally cost them their health, even their lives, but they pressed on, driven by a belief that their work mattered beyond measure. What's astonishing is how much variety existed within this tradition. Some manuscripts were modest, meant for everyday use in monasteries. Others were lavish commissions for royalty, dripping with gold and adorned with intricate scenes that unfolded like miniature paintings. The Book of Kells, for example, isn't just a religious text, it's a masterpiece of Celtic art, its pages alive with swirling patterns and fantastical creatures. Each manuscript tells its own story, not just through the words it contains, but through the choices of its creators, the colors they favored, the borders they designed, even the tiny doodles hidden in the margins. So when we look at an illuminated manuscript today, we're seeing more than just an old book. We're witnessing the culmination of faith, artistry, and sheer human determination, a testament to what people will endure to create something beautiful and lasting. And that's what makes these works so extraordinary. They weren't just made to be read. They were made to inspire awe, to bridge the gap between earth and heaven, one golden page at a time. To call medieval scribes mere copyists would be like calling a composer a note-taker. It completely misses the profound purpose behind their work. These men weren't just transferring words from one page to another. They were performing a sacred ritual, one they believed connected them directly to the divine. In the hushed silence of the scriptorium, each letter they formed was a prayer made visible. The parchment wasn't just material, it was holy ground, and the ink flowing from their quills was akin to blood spilled in devotion. This mindset transformed their craft into something far greater than manual labor. Every curve of a letter, every flourish of decoration, was executed with the care of someone who believed angels might one day inspect their work. The physical conditions they endured only heightened the spiritual weight of their task. Picture a winter morning in a stone-walled monastery, where the cold seeped into bones and the only light came from precious candles or small, high windows. Hands stiff from the chill had to remain steady for hours, tracing intricate initials in colors made from crushed gems and metals. Eye strain was constant. There were no magnifying glasses, no adjustable lamps. A scribe might spend an entire day on just a few square inches of text, his world reduced to the tiny universe of his parchment. And yet, despite these hardships, they pursued perfection with almost superhuman discipline. A single misplaced stroke could mean scraping away hours of labor with a knife, or worse, starting the entire page anew. What's fascinating is how their reverence for the work shaped the very tools they used. Quills weren't just plucked from any goose. The best came from the left wings of birds, as the curve suited right-handed scribes. Ink recipes were closely guarded secrets, often involving everything from oak galls to iron salts, mixed with wine or vinegar to prevent mold. Even the ruling lines guiding their text were drawn with silver point or lead, tools reserved for sacred tasks. Every element of their craft was infused with intention, from the way they sharpened their pens to the posture they maintained while writing back straight, shoulders level, as if their bodies too were offerings at an altar. But perhaps the most striking evidence of their devotion lies in the margins of their manuscripts. Between the lines of scripture or philosophy, you'll sometimes find tiny notes, prayers for strength, complaints about the cold, even the occasional doodle of a tired monk slumped over his desk. These personal glimpses remind us that scribes were human, battling fatigue and frustration even as they strove for spiritual excellence. One famously scribbled in the margin, "The parchment is hairy, the ink is pale, the day is dark." Yet he kept writing. That tension between earthly struggle and heavenly aspiration is what makes these manuscripts so much more than historical artifacts. They're testaments to what happens when ordinary hands undertake extraordinary work, not for glory, but for something they believed was eternal. The tools of an illuminator were far from ordinary, each one honed to perfection through generations of trial and error. Take the humble quill, for instance. Not just any feather would do. Scribes sought out the strongest primary feathers from geese or swans, preferably plucked in spring when they were at their most flexible. The tip had to be cut at just the right angle with a precision knife, creating a nib that could glide smoothly across parchment without catching or splattering. A poorly cut quill meant blotched letters and wasted materials, so masters guarded their cutting techniques like trade secrets, and if a scribe was left-handed. That added another layer of difficulty, as the natural slant of feathers favored right-handed writers, forcing many to adapt their grip or even learn to write with their opposite hand. Then there was the parchment itself, a far cry from modern paper. Made from the skins of calves, sheep, or goats, each sheet underwent a grueling transformation. The hides were soaked in lime to remove hair, stretched on wooden frames to dry, then scraped repeatedly with crescent-shaped knives until perfectly thin and smooth. Higher quality parchment, called vellum, came from younger animals and had an almost translucent quality, perfect for showcasing gold leaf. But imperfections were common. Thick veins, hair follicles, even scars from the animal's life could disrupt the writing surface. Some scribes worked around these flaws creatively, turning blemishes into part of the decoration, while others meticulously patched holes with threads made from animal sinew. The pigments they used read like an alchemist's shopping list. Vibrant blues came from crushed Lapis lazuli, a gemstone imported at great cost from Afghanistan. Reds were derived from cinnabar, a mercury sulfide that could poison careless handlers, or from tiny scale insects boiled to extract their crimson dye. Greens often contained toxic copper or arsenic compounds, while rich yellows might be made from saffron or even urine-treated buckthorn berries. Each pigment had to be ground for hours with a mortar and pestle, then mixed with egg yolk to create tempera paint. The yolk acted as a binder, giving the colors luminosity but also a frustratingly short working time. Once prepared, the paint dried quickly, forcing illuminators to work with tiny brushes in rapid, precise strokes. Gold, the most coveted material, presented its own set of challenges. Beaten into sheets thinner than tissue paper, gold leaf would tear at the slightest breeze or misplaced breath. Scribes applied it using a brush slightly sticky with garlic juice or gum arabic, then polished it with a wolf's tooth or agate burnisher until it gleamed like sunlight trapped on the page. The process was so delicate that many monasteries had strict rules about movement or conversation while gold work was underway. A single sneeze could send a day's wages worth of gold fluttering to the floor. Yet for all their beauty, these tools carried hidden perils. The same cinnabar that produced brilliant red initials could cause tremors and madness with prolonged exposure. Lead white, used for highlights, slowly poisoned those who handled it regularly. Even the act of grinding pigments released toxic dust into the air, settling in scribes' lungs over years of work. And the candlelight they depended on, its flickering glow strained eyes to the point of permanent damage, while wax drips and stray sparks posed constant threats to priceless manuscripts. Every brilliant page we admire today came at a cost measured not just in skill, but in the quiet sacrifices of those who created them. The brilliant colors that brought medieval manuscripts to life came at a terrifying cost. Many of the most prized pigments were literal poisons in disguise. Take vermilion, that fiery red that dances across so many illuminated pages. Its beauty hid a deadly secret, mercury sulfide, a substance we now know can cause tremors, memory loss, and even madness with prolonged exposure. Scribes would grind the mineral into powder, unknowingly inhaling toxic dust that settled deep in their lungs with every breath. And mercury wasn't alone. Their palette was a rogues gallery of hazardous materials. That luminous white highlighting sacred figures, often made from lead carbonate, which could seep through the skin during long hours of painting, bringing fatigue, abdominal pain, and neurological damage over years of use. Then there were the greens, vibrant as spring foliage but equally treacherous. Many came from verdigris copper acetate, or worse, arsenic-based compounds like Paris green. These pigments didn't just sit passively on the page. In damp conditions, arsenic could form poisonous gases, while copper greens might corrode the very parchment they adorned. Some historians speculate that the mysterious illnesses plaguing certain monastic communities might trace back to their own art supplies. Yet scribes had no alternatives. These were the only colors that could achieve the luminosity demanded by their sacred work. Even the preparation process was perilous. Grinding Lapis lazuli for ultramarine blue released silica dust that scarred lung tissue, while mixing pigments with egg tempera meant handling raw eggs daily, a breeding ground for bacteria in an age before antibiotics. The risks multiplied under candlelight. Picture an illuminator leaning close to a manuscript, his face inches from wet paint as flickering shadows distort his vision. A stray drip of wax could ruin hours of work, but far worse was the ever-present danger of fire. Libraries and scriptoria housed irreplaceable knowledge next to open flames, with flammable ink solvents like wine or vinegar nearby. Some monasteries kept buckets of sand at hand, knowing water would only spread the grease fires from their oil lamps. And then there were the candles themselves, often made from tallow, which smoked and sputtered, leaving behind a film of soot that clung to lungs and manuscripts alike. What's astonishing is how these artists adapted. Some likely developed subtle techniques to minimize exposure, like holding their breath while grinding pigments or working near windows when possible. Manuscripts sometimes show discoloration where acidic greens ate through pages, suggesting scribes watched their materials fail over time without understanding why. Yet they persisted, layering poison onto parchment in the belief that their work served a higher purpose. When we see a 15th century manuscript still glowing with undimmed colors, we're not just looking at art, we're seeing the physical legacy of people who literally risked their lives to make beauty permanent. Their dedication rewrote the boundaries of devotion, proving that faith could be measured not just in prayers, but in the slow, sacrificial accumulation of toxic dust under fingernails and the quiet ache of mercury-heavy bones. Fire was the silent enemy lurking in every scriptorium, its threat as constant as the scratch of quills on parchment. Imagine the scene: rows of monks hunched over their work, surrounded by precious manuscripts stacked on wooden desks, while flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows across the stone walls. A single moment of distraction, a sleeve brushing too close, a sudden draft from an open window, could send flames racing across vellum pages faster than anyone could react. Monasteries knew this danger intimately, which is why their rules for scribes read like survival manuals. Candles were anchored in heavy iron or bronze holders, designed to resist tipping even if jostled. Scribes worked at arm's length from one another, creating human firebreaks between desks. Some scriptoria even positioned novice monks as fire watchers, their sole duty to monitor the candles and sound the alarm at the first sign of danger. Yet accidents still happened. The Benedictine monastery of Fleury in France lost its entire library to a fire in the 10th century, centuries of knowledge vanishing in hours. Other manuscripts bear scars of close calls, charred edges carefully trimmed away, pages with telltale brown stains where heat blistered the ink. One surviving manuscript from Spain even shows a scribe's frantic attempt to salvage his work. The text stops mid-sentence, the final letters smeared as if the writer had to flee. These marks tell stories no chronicle ever recorded of panic in the night, monks throwing water or sand onto precious books, or carrying armfuls of manuscripts through smoke-filled corridors. The psychological toll must have been immense. Consider the scribe who spent months on a single page, only to watch it ignite from a stray spark. Some monasteries stored unfinished works in stone vaults overnight, but daylight hours still meant working in a minefield of risk. The very tools of their trade conspired against them. Oil lamps could explode if knocked over, wax candles pooled dangerously hot liquid, and even the ink itself was often alcohol-based, making it frighteningly flammable. Yet what choice did they have? Without light, there could be no manuscripts, so they pressed on, balancing the need for illumination against the ever-present specter of disaster. Perhaps the most haunting evidence of this tension lies in the manuscripts themselves. Some pages feature tiny wax droplets preserved in the margins, like frozen tears, reminders of the candle that once hovered too close. Others show unusual haste in their lettering, as if the scribe rushed to finish before some unseen threat caught up with him. And then there are the gaps in history, the books we know existed but vanished without a trace, likely consumed in fires no one lived to describe. When we hold an intact medieval manuscript today, we're holding a survivor. Its survival wasn't just luck. It was the result of countless careful hands working against impossible odds, knowing that their greatest masterpiece might one day become fuel for the very flames that birthed it. The human cost of creating illuminated manuscripts wasn't just measured in poisoned pigments or candlelit fires. It was etched into the very bodies of the scribes themselves. Day after day, year after year, these men hunched over their desks in positions that would cripple a modern office worker within hours. Their spines curved like question marks under the weight of devotion, their shoulders permanently rounded from hours of leaning toward flickering light. The medieval equivalent of carpal tunnel syndrome was rampant, known then as writer's cramp. It twisted fingers into claw-like shapes, leaving joints swollen and hands trembling even at rest. Some scribes resorted to wrapping their fingers in strips of linen just to keep holding their quills, while others described pain so severe they could only work in short bursts, their muscles screaming in protest. The eyes suffered most of all. In an age before corrective lenses, nearsightedness was a death sentence for precision work. Scribes squinted at pages through candle smoke and haze, their corneas strained by the relentless dance of uneven light. Manuscripts from the period sometimes include marginal notes begging forgiveness for errors, not because of carelessness, but because the writer literally could no longer see clearly. One monk lamented that after 30 years in the scriptorium, the world beyond his desk had become a blur, his vision sacrificed page by page to the demands of sacred text. Winter brought special torment as freezing scriptoria forced scribes to work gloved, their stiff fingers struggling to maintain the delicate pressure needed for gold leaf or intricate initials. What's remarkable is how these physical struggles left their mark on the manuscripts themselves. Pages created by aging scribes often show subtle changes, letters growing larger as eyesight failed, inks darker to compensate for fading vision. Some illuminators developed distinctive styles not from artistic choice but necessity. Elaborate borders might hide tremors in their lines, while heavier pigments could mask an unsteady hand. Even the content sometimes reflected their suffering. Prayers for healing appear in margins, alongside doodles of bent-backed monks rubbing their eyes. The famous 12th century scribe Edwin of Canterbury went so far as to include a self-portrait in one manuscript, showing himself at work with bloodshot eyes and a hunched posture, a stark confession of the toll his art demanded. Yet through it all, they persisted. Some monasteries rotated scribes between copying and less strenuous tasks like binding or preparing parchment, recognizing that no body could withstand decades of such strain. Others brewed herbal remedies, willow bark tea for joint pain, chamomile compresses for tired eyes, creating an early form of occupational medicine. But ultimately, there was no substitute for endurance. When we admire the crisp lines of a medieval manuscript today, we're seeing more than skill. We're witnessing the triumph of discipline over agony, of faith over failing flesh. These pages weren't just written with ink and gold. They were written with the slow, stubborn ache of bodies pushed beyond reasonable limits, all for the sake of preserving light in what they saw as a darkening world. The manuscripts themselves became mirrors of this struggle. In some, you can trace a scribe's life through the changing quality of the script, the bold confidence of youth giving way to the careful, deliberate strokes of middle age, then finally the shaky but determined lines of old age. A few even show where a scribe's hand visibly faltered, the ink pooling where pain forced a pause, only for the line to continue unbroken. These aren't flaws, they're testament marks, proof that perfection wasn't the absence of struggle, but the will to continue despite it. When a medieval scribe wrote, "Here ends the work, thanks be to God," it wasn't just a formula, it was the relieved exhale of someone who'd poured every ounce of strength into making something that would outlast his aching bones. Before a single drop of ink touched parchment, the creation of an illuminated manuscript began with painstaking preparation, a dance of geometry and devotion that could take longer than the actual painting. Scribes didn't just wing their designs, they plotted every element with mathematical precision, using compasses and straightedges to divide the page into a grid of faint lines. These guidelines, often still visible under magnification, reveal how even the most spontaneous-looking flourishes were carefully choreographed. Initial letters, those grand openings to sacred texts, were first sketched in lead point or silver point materials that could be erased or burnished away if mistakes were made. Only when the framework was flawless would the scribe reach for ink and gold. The margins, those lively borders teeming with vines and creatures, were far from random doodles. Each element served a purpose, whether to mark important passages, provide visual rest for the reader's eye, or symbolize theological concepts. A serpent coiled around a letter might represent temptation, while a pecking bird could signify the soul's hunger for divine wisdom. Some designs even functioned as medieval search tools. A monk flipping through a psalter could spot a distinctive foliate pattern to find his place. And contrary to modern assumptions, not all marginalia were solemn. Between prayers, scribes tucked in mischievous hares wielding swords, monks riding snails, or hybrid beasts playing instruments, offering moments of levity in an otherwise sacred space. Gold wasn't just slapped onto the page, it was applied in stages that demanded both chemistry and patience. After laying down a sticky base of gesso, often mixed with crushed marble for texture, the scribe would breathe lightly on the surface to reactivate the adhesive at just the right moment before pressing on the fragile gold leaf. Too moist and the gold would crumple, too dry and it wouldn't adhere. Then came the burnishing, polishing the gold with an animal tooth until it gleamed with celestial radiance. The effect was intentional. When candlelight hit these pages during nighttime services, the gold seemed to emit its own divine light, making the words glow as if heaven itself had touched them. Color choices followed strict symbolic codes. Blue, the most expensive pigment derived from Lapis lazuli, was reserved for the Virgin Mary's robes or heavenly backgrounds, while Christ's robes blazed with cinnabar red. Greens, often symbolic of rebirth, framed scenes of resurrection. Even the white spaces were deliberate. Negative space wasn't empty but sacred, allowing the eye to rest and the mind to reflect. This wasn't just art for art's sake. It was visual theology, where every hue and curve carried layers of meaning known to medieval readers as instinctively as we recognize traffic signals today. Perhaps most astonishing is how these artists worked without modern luxuries like magnifiers or adjustable lighting. A single capital letter might contain dozens of interwoven patterns, each strand no thicker than a hair, executed with brushes made from just 3 or 4 squirrel hairs tied to a quill. Mistakes weren't easily fixed. Parchment's durability meant errors had to be scraped away with knives or painted over with opaque white, leaving telltale lumps under subsequent layers. Yet despite these constraints, their precision rivals anything produced by digital tools today. When we zoom in on high-resolution scans of these pages, we find no shaky lines, no rushed corrections, just unwavering discipline distilled into beauty. This level of craftsmanship didn't emerge overnight. Manuscripts often passed through multiple hands: a scribe for text, a rubricator for red headings, an illuminator for miniatures, each specialist honing their skills over decades. Apprentices might spend years grinding pigments or preparing parchment before touching a finished page. The result was a collaborative masterpiece where individual styles blended seamlessly, united by shared devotion. Today's artists might marvel at their ability to harmonize intricate details across hundreds of pages, all without the aid of sketches or digital drafts. Their secret, a lifetime spent training hand and eye to serve something greater than themselves, where every stroke was both an act of worship and a defiance of the physical limits imposed by candlelight, trembling hands, and mortal eyes. Before a scribe's vision could shine in gold and pigment, it began as a ghostly sketch, a network of faint lines barely visible against the parchment. This underdrawing was the skeleton of the entire page, and one misplaced stroke could throw off the balance of everything to come. Using diluted ink or lead point, the artist mapped out each element with meticulous care: the curves of letters, the borders of miniatures, even the exact placement of gold leaf. These guidelines were so delicate that modern conservators sometimes need ultraviolet light to detect them, revealing how much planning went into what might appear spontaneous. Some scribes worked with compasses and straightedges, dividing pages into precise grids to ensure symmetry, while others sketched freehand, their confidence born from years of muscle memory. Layering color was like watching the page come alive. Pigments weren't applied all at once but built up in translucent washes, creating depth through patience. A saint's robe might start as a flat blue, then gain shadows with layers of darker ultramarine, and finally gleam with highlights of white or silver. The technique mirrored fresco painting, where each layer had to dry completely before the next could be added, a process that could stretch for days. Mistakes were costly. Too much moisture in the brush could warp the parchment, too little pressure might leave streaks, and because egg tempera dried quickly, illuminators worked in small sections, their hands moving with the precision of watchmakers. Then came the gold, the step that separated great manuscripts from merely good ones. Applying gold leaf wasn't just a technical process, it was alchemy. The scribe would first paint a sticky base of gesso, often mixed with crushed marble or chalk to create texture. Then, holding his breath to steady his hands, he'd lay the fragile leaf onto the adhesive, using a brush slightly dampened with garlic juice or egg white to help it cling. The real magic happened during burnishing. With an agate stone or even a wolf's tooth, the scribe would polish the gold until it gleamed like sunlight trapped on the page. This final step could make or break the effect. Under-polished gold looked dull, while overworked areas might flake away entirely. The pressure was relentless. A single smudge, a stray bristle from a brush, or a moment of distraction could undo weeks of labor. Some manuscripts bear subtle evidence of these near disasters, a saint's face painted over a botched first attempt, or a border adjusted to hide a quill slip. Yet the scribes persevered, driven by the knowledge that their work would outlast them. When we examine these pages today, we're not just seeing art, we're witnessing the exact moment where patience met perfection, where human hands wrestled stubborn materials into something timeless. And that's what makes these manuscripts more than historical artifacts. They're triumphs of will over uncertainty, proof that beauty could be wrested from the brink of disaster, one painstaking layer at a time. But creating these masterpieces was only half the story. Once completed, illuminated manuscripts entered a world where they were both sacred objects and practical tools. They traveled in the saddlebags of bishops, graced the altars of cathedrals, and sometimes even served as diplomatic gifts between kings. Their journey from scriptorium to sanctuary reveals just how deeply medieval society valued them, not just for their beauty, but for the power they carried. A Bible glowing with gold leaf wasn't merely read, it was performed, its pages turned during Mass as the congregation marveled at the play of candlelight on its surfaces. Psalters became personal devotionals for nobles, their margins filled with prayers added by generations of hands. And in an age where few could read, the images spoke volumes, translating scripture into visual sermons that even the illiterate could understand. The care given to these books after completion speaks volumes. They were often bound in covers of velvet or ivory, some even encrusted with jewels and relics. Chains sometimes tethered them to lecterns, not to imprison them, but to ensure their safety while allowing public access. Monasteries kept detailed inventories, noting repairs and lending records like librarians tracking precious loans. And when fire or war threatened, manuscripts were among the first treasures saved, carried to safety in the arms of monks who risked their lives for the written word. This reverence wasn't misplaced. In a world before printing presses, every manuscript represented an irreplaceable investment of time, skill, and material wealth. But more than that, they were bridges between earth and heaven, objects believed to carry traces of the divine. When a priest traced his finger over inked words during Mass, or when a noblewoman paused on a painted scene of the Annunciation, they weren't just seeing colors on a page, they were standing at the threshold of the sacred. And that's why scribes endured poisoned pigments, failing eyesight, and the ever-present fear of fire. They weren't just making books, they were crafting portals. In medieval Europe, an illuminated manuscript wasn't just a book, it was a treasure on par with crowns and relics. The sheer cost of materials alone could equal a small fortune. Gold leaf mined from distant rivers, pigments imported across continents, vellum requiring the skins of entire herds. Commissioning one was an act of both piety and power, a way for kings and bishops to proclaim their devotion while flaunting their wealth. The famous Tres Riches Heures du Duc de Berry, created for a French prince in the 15th century, reportedly cost more than a castle's annual upkeep. No wonder these volumes were often inventoried alongside jewels in royal wills, their worth measured not in pages but in the years of labor and lifetimes of wages they represented. Yet their value went far beyond money. In an age where most people would never own a single book, these manuscripts became sacred objects believed to radiate divine protection. Monasteries recorded miracles attributed to particularly holy codices soldiers spared in battle after swearing oaths on their pages, plagues halting at town gates where manuscripts were displayed. Some were even carried into war like talismans, their covers reinforced with metal to double as shields. This spiritual aura explains why so many survived wars and sackings. Invaders who melted down church silver often hesitated to destroy books, fearing supernatural retribution. The Lindisfarne Gospels, for instance, endured Viking raids not because of stealth, but because its ornate cover was seen as too charged with sacred power to violate. The physical security surrounding these books reveals just how prized they were. Chains often exquisitely crafted from silver or gilt bronze tethered manuscripts to lecterns in cathedrals and universities. This wasn't to imprison knowledge, but to share it safely. Like museum ropes today, chains allowed public access while preventing theft. Some libraries even designed rotating book wheels, letting readers consult multiple chained volumes without unshackling them. The practice was so widespread that the word library in many medieval documents literally meant the chain room. What's fascinating is how ownership of these manuscripts blurred the line between spiritual and political power. When a noblewoman donated a psalter to a convent, she wasn't just giving a book, she was securing prayers for her lineage in perpetuity. Kings gifted illuminated Bibles to allies as diplomatic tools, their lavishness signaling both generosity and might. Even the act of commissioning a manuscript had layers of meaning. Patrons often had their portraits painted into the margins, kneeling piously beside saints, a visual claim to virtue that outlasted their mortal lives. The reverence for these objects sometimes bordered on the mystical. Certain manuscripts were believed to cure illnesses if touched to afflicted body parts, their pages thought to absorb holiness through years of use in prayer. Others developed reputations as oracles. Monks would open them randomly, interpreting the first words their eyes fell upon as divine guidance. This supernatural status ensured their survival through the Reformation's iconoclasm and the French Revolution's purges, hidden in attic beams or buried in monastery walls until danger passed. When we hold a medieval manuscript today, we're touching something that outlived empires. Its survival wasn't accidental. It was willed into being by generations who saw it not as a mere object, but as a vessel for everything from royal legacies to whispered prayers. The vellum may have yellowed, the gold may have dulled, but the awe it commands remains undimmed, a testament to the enduring power of beauty married to belief. Monastic scriptoriums were more than just workspaces. They were sacred factories of knowledge, humming with quiet industry. Picture a long, vaulted room lined with wooden desks, each occupied by a monk bent over his task in disciplined silence. The only sounds were the rhythmic scratching of quills, the occasional clink of an ink pot, and the soft rustle of turning parchment. This was no chaotic artist studio. It was a meticulously organized production line, where every step, from preparing vellum to binding finished folios, followed centuries-old routines perfected by generations of scribes. Within these walls, specialization reigned. Some monks spent decades mastering the art of calligraphy, their hands trained to form letters with unwavering consistency. Others became experts in pigment mixing, grinding minerals into vivid powders with mortar and pestle. A select few earned the coveted role of illuminator, entrusted with painting scenes that would make scripture come alive. Even the preparation of materials was a sacred craft. Parchment makers soaked and scraped animal hides with ritual precision, while binders stitched pages together with linen thread strong enough to last centuries. This division of labor wasn't just efficient, it was spiritual. Each contributor saw their task as a link in a chain stretching back to the evangelists themselves. The scriptorium's strict silence served a deeper purpose. Without spoken words, monks communicated through shared rhythms, the synchronized dipping of quills, the collective pause for prayer at canonical hours. This enforced quiet wasn't repression. It was a form of meditation, allowing scribes to lose themselves in the flow of their work. Some monasteries even positioned their scriptoriums near the choir, so the chants of praying monks could drift in as a reminder of their higher calling. The physical space reflected this devotion. Windows were carefully angled to maximize natural light, while writing surfaces sloped slightly to reduce strain on hunched shoulders. Yet for all their discipline, these scribes were human. Between the lines of sacred text, their personalities peeked through like sunlight through stained glass. Some couldn't resist doodling a weary monk's face here, a battling snail there transforming margins into medieval meme boards. Others left cheeky notes, like the famous scribe who wrote, "Thank God it will soon be dark," as daylight faded. Even errors tell stories. A skipped line might be patched with creative flourishes, while an irritated corrector's knife sometimes left scars in the parchment. These mistakes are treasures, proving that perfection wasn't the absence of humanity, but the triumph of devotion over it. The scriptorium's legacy isn't just in the books it produced, but in the very idea of collaborative creation. Long before modern publishing houses, these monks invented peer review, scrutinizing each other's work for errors before a manuscript left their walls. They developed early copyright systems, with some monasteries stamping their colophons like trademarks, and perhaps most strikingly, they built networks across Europe, exchanging techniques and styles in a medieval version of open-source culture. When we flip through a surviving manuscript today, we're not just seeing one artist's hand, we're witnessing the collective genius of an institution that, for nearly 1,000 years, stood as civilization's guardian against the dark. Between the solemn Latin verses and gilded saints, medieval manuscripts hide a secret world, one where rabbits duel with snails, monks flee from giant snails, and hybrid creatures play musical instruments. These marginal doodles, known as drolleries, weren't just idle distractions. They were windows into the minds of scribes who balanced sacred duty with human whimsy. Take the famous Nightvies snail motif appearing in dozens of manuscripts, a baffling trend where armored warriors cower before tiny mollusks. Some scholars suggest these were inside jokes about cowardice, while others see social satire mocking nobles who avoided real battles. Then there are the babuins, fantastical hybrids with human faces and animal bodies, grinning from the edges of psalters like mischievous spirits. Their absurdity wasn't accidental. By placing the grotesque beside the divine, scribes mirrored the medieval worldview where holiness and chaos coexisted. But not all marginalia were playful. Some carried sharp political barbs. In one 14th century manuscript, a fox dressed as a bishop preaches to geese a clear jab at corrupt clergy. Another shows a donkey playing a harp while a monkey reads scripture, mocking those who performed sacraments without understanding. These weren't just doodles, they were acts of quiet rebellion, smuggled into sacred texts under the guise of decoration. Even the colors held meaning. A monkey painted in costly blue pigment might represent wasteful spending by the church, while a fox in dull brown could symbolize deceit. The scribes knew their audience, educated monks who'd recognize the subtext but wouldn't report it. The most poignant marginalia, though, are the personal ones. A tiny self-portrait of a scribe rubbing his tired eyes, a note complaining about the cold. "My fingers are numb, my ink freezes." One even scribbled, "This page has fought me all day," beside a botched line. These cracks in the solemn facade remind us that these weren't anonymous copyists, they were individuals with aching backs and wandering minds. Occasionally, their frustrations boiled over. In the margins of a Spanish manuscript, one exasperated monk drew a crude figure hurling the book itself at a demon. Yet for all their irreverence, these scribes never lost sight of their mission. Even the wildest marginalia often served spiritual purposes. A hare wielding a sword might symbolize the soul battling sin, while a pelican piercing its own breast to feed its young mirrored Christ's sacrifice. The line between sacred and profane was deliberately blurred because to medieval minds, God's creation included laughter as much as liturgy. When we chuckle at these ancient doodles, we're not disrespecting the past, we're finally hearing the scribes' voices across the centuries, whispering, "Look closer." We were here too, but the margins held darker secrets too. Some manuscripts contain hidden warnings, a skull tucked into floral borders, a demon lurking behind a saint. These weren't mistakes, they were medieval memento mori, reminders of mortality in an age of plagues and wars. One chilling example appears in a French book of hours. Amid cheerful vines, a skeleton plays chess with a living man, a stark allegory of death's inevitability. Other manuscripts feature Judas goats, animals leading others to slaughter, symbolizing betrayal. Even the colors spoke in code. Red initials sometimes bled into the parchment like wounds, while blackened gold leaf hinted at tarnished virtue. The most unsettling marginalia, however, are the ones we've yet to decipher. Certain symbols recur across Europe, reversed letters, odd markings, that may be ciphers or secret guild signs. In a German manuscript, musical notes in the margin form a melody unrelated to the text. Was it the scribe's favorite tune, or something more esoteric? Another shows a strange wheel with Hebrew letters, a mystery still unsolved. These enigmas remind us that for all we've learned about illuminated manuscripts, their creators still guard some mysteries jealously. Perhaps that's fitting. After all, in an age when books were portals to the divine, some secrets were meant to stay between the scribe and God. Beneath the playful drolleries and ornate borders of illuminated manuscripts lies a shadow world, one where grinning demons clutch at saints, where skeletal figures dance in the margins, and where scenes of torment unfold between psalms of praise. These weren't mere decorative flourishes, they were manifestations of a medieval psyche that saw the divine and the diabolical as constant companions. In the Sherborne Missal, a 15th century masterpiece, a cheerful vine suddenly twists into a grotesque face, its tongue lolling like a serpent. The luttrell psalter hides a chilling detail, a rabbit, typically a symbol of innocence, gleefully stabbing a snail with a dagger. Even the most sacred texts couldn't escape this duality. A Bible might feature Christ's resurrection on one page, while the opposite margin swarmed with imps tormenting damned souls. What drove scribes to juxtapose sanctity with such visceral horror? Some historians argue these images served as moral instruction, visual sermons warning against sin's consequences. A monk idly flipping through his psalter might pause at a marginal scene of a miser being devoured by toads, a stark reminder of greed's fate. Others suggest these motifs reflected very real fears. The Black Death's waves had left Europe littered with corpses, and wars ravaged the countryside. When a scribe drew a skeleton playing a lute beside a prayer for deliverance, he wasn't being macabre, he was sketching the world he knew, where death could arrive with the next cough or passing army. Yet the darkest marginalia hint at something more personal, the toll of the scribe's own isolation. Imagine spending years in a dim scriptorium, your only company the flicker of candles and the whisper of your quill. Small wonder some monks populated the margins with their private demons. In one German manuscript, a tiny figure, perhaps the artist's self-portrait, is shown chained to a writing desk by a grinning devil. Another depicts a scribe weeping as ink floods the page like a black tide. These weren't just fantasies, they were cries from minds pushed to the brink by endless precision, physical pain, and the weight of their sacred task. The violence in these images often carries cryptic symbolism. A fox preaching to geese might mock corrupt clergy, while a knight cowering from a snail could satirize cowardly nobles. But some scenes resist easy interpretation, like the recurring motif of hybrid creatures, part human, part beast, engaging in acts both sacred and profane. A hare might hold a crucifix while simultaneously defecating on a bishop's mitre. These baffling contradictions may have been inside jokes among clerics, or perhaps coded critiques of a church riddled with hypocrisy. Modern eyes might dismiss such imagery as medieval superstition, but their power lingers. When candlelight hit these pages during nighttime prayers, the gold leaf would glow, while the demons in the margins seemed to writhe in the shifting shadows. For the medieval viewer, this wasn't decoration. It was a reminder that every moment of grace existed alongside the threat of damnation. The scribes didn't shy from this tension. They illuminated it literally. Their legacy isn't just the beauty they created, but the honesty with which they acknowledged the darkness that beauty sought to dispel. The survival of illuminated manuscripts across centuries is nothing short of miraculous, a testament to both medieval craftsmanship and modern science. Parchment made from animal skins treated with lime and stretched to perfection possesses an almost magical resilience when shielded from moisture. In the dry chill of monastic libraries or the sealed treasure chests of nobility, these pages resisted decay far better than modern paper ever could. Yet their enemies were legion dampness that encouraged mold, insects hungry for collagen-rich hides, sunlight that bleached vibrant pigments into ghosts of their former glory. The very gold leaf that made these manuscripts shine could become their undoing, flaking away at the slightest touch or humidity change. Modern conservators wage a quiet war against time using tools medieval scribes could never have imagined. Humidity-controlled glass cases maintain the exact conditions parchment craves, while LED lighting eliminates the ultraviolet rays that once faded centuries-old blues into pale grays. Some laboratories employ multispectral imaging, a technique that uses different light wavelengths to reveal text erased by time or hidden under centuries of grime. In the British Library, researchers once discovered an entire lost manuscript beneath the visible text of a palimpsest, a reused parchment, by photographing it under ultraviolet light. The hidden words, scraped away by some medieval scribe desperate for materials, glowed back to life like whispers from the past, yet some challenges remain unconquered. Vermilion red, that brilliant pigment made from toxic mercury sulfide, darkens irreversibly when exposed to light. Ultramarine blue, ground from precious Lapis lazuli, can powder away from pages if the egg tempera binder deteriorates. Even the gold that once symbolized divine light now threatens its own destruction. Tiny vibrations from urban traffic or museum footfalls can loosen delicate leaf over decades. Conservators sometimes work under microscopes, using hairs from Siberian weasel tails, still the finest natural brushes, to reattach flakes of gold with adhesives weaker than the parchment itself, ensuring future scholars can reverse their work if better methods emerge. The most heartbreaking losses often come from well-meaning mistakes. 19th century restorers, unaware of parchment sensitivity, sometimes washed pages with water, causing inks to bleed irreparably. Others applied modern varnishes that yellowed and cracked, trapping acidic compounds against medieval pigments. Today's conservators approach repairs with surgical caution, documenting every intervention so future generations won't repeat their errors. In the Vatican Library, technicians now use tiny Japanese paper hinges to stabilize torn folios, a method reversible with just a puff of moisture. What's truly humbling is realizing these manuscripts have survived wars, fires, and neglect only to face new threats in our care. Air pollution introduces acidic particles that etch into parchment, while climate change alters the stable environments that preserved these works for centuries. Some institutions now store their rarest manuscripts in argon-filled cases, the same inert gas that protects the Declaration of Independence. Yet for all our technology, we've learned one timeless lesson from those medieval scribes. Preservation isn't just about chemistry and control, it's about reverence. Every gloved hand that turns a page, every adjusted hygrometer, continues an unbroken chain of devotion that began in candlelit scriptoria. The gold may flake and the pigments may fade, but that commitment, at least, remains as enduring as the parchment itself. Among the countless illuminated manuscripts painstakingly crafted across the Middle Ages, a few transcend time as crowning achievements of human artistry. The Book of Kells, created around the year 800 on the windswept island of Iona, remains the ultimate expression of Celtic illumination. Its pages pulse with intricate knotwork so precise that modern calligraphers struggle to replicate them without magnification, each swirling pattern interlacing with biblical scenes in colors still vibrant after 12 centuries. Then there's the Tres Riches Huras du Duc de Berry, a 15th century French masterpiece that reads like a medieval Instagram feed. Its calendar pages burst with vignettes of nobles and peasants alike, from snowy hunts to summer harvests, all rendered in jewel-like pigments that make the duck's world glow with eternal vitality. What sets these manuscripts apart isn't just their beauty, but their intimate connection to those who commissioned them. The Book of Kells was likely created as a sacred object for altar display, its densely decorated carpet pages designed to overwhelm viewers with divine wonder during Mass. Meanwhile, the Tres Riches Huras served as both prayer book and status symbol for the Duke of Berry, who had his likeness painted kneeling piously beside saints, ensuring his earthly privilege was immortalized alongside heavenly glory. Even the pigments tell stories of power. The ultramarine blue in the Duke's manuscript came from Lapis lazuli mined in Afghanistan and transported across continents at staggering cost, making its lavish use a silent proclamation of wealth. Other masterpieces reveal different priorities. The Lindisfarne Gospels, created in 8th century Northumbria, blend Celtic spirals with Mediterranean influences, a visual record of cultural exchange at the edge of the known world. Its famous Chi Rho page, where the Greek letters initiating Christ's name explode into a psychedelic whirl of color, may have been designed to mimic the disorienting brilliance of divine revelation. Contrast this with the more restrained elegance of the Hours of Jean Devereux, a palm-sized prayer book painted with such delicacy that some scenes require a magnifying glass to appreciate fully. Made for a young French queen in the 14th century, its tiny margins feature surprisingly playful scenes, a monkey stealing fruit, a jester mid-cartwheel hinting at the humanity behind royal piety. The survival of these books is itself a series of minor miracles. The Book of Kells endured Viking raids, being buried for safekeeping, and even a notorious 19th century theft where its gold cover was pried off and lost forever. The Tres Riches Huras passed through wars and revolutions, its pages scattered before being painstakingly reassembled. Each bears scars that deepen their story's water stains from hurried rescues, marginal notes from generations of owners, even the faint impressions of fingers that turned their pages in devotion. Today, when we admire them in climate-controlled museum cases, we're not just seeing art, we're witnessing the convergence of faith, politics, and sheer human stubbornness against the erosions of time. Perhaps what makes these manuscripts truly legendary is how they collapse distance between our world and theirs. In the margins of the Luttrell Psalter, a 14th century English work, farmers till fields with the same stooped backs as their medieval ancestors. The Morgan Crusader Bible captures the clang of swords and the glint of Saracen armor with such immediacy that you can almost hear the battle cries. These weren't static artworks but living documents meant to be touched, read aloud, and passed through generations. When a modern viewer gasps at the gold-leafed radiance of the Vienna Genesis or traces a finger over the labyrinthine initials in the Arnstein Bible, they're participating in a chain of wonder stretching back to the original scribes, each reaction a silent tribute to hands that worked by candlelight to create something eternal. The rhythmic clatter of Gutenberg's printing press in the 15th century didn't just produce books, it shattered a 1,000-year tradition. Suddenly, pages could be stamped out in hours rather than months, making knowledge accessible to the masses but stripping away the soul of the book as an art object. Illuminated manuscripts, with their laborious hand-painted details, couldn't compete with the speed and affordability of printed text. The economics were brutal. Why spend a year's wages on a single Lux Psalter when a printed Bible cost a fraction of the price? Monasteries that had once hummed with scribble activity fell quiet, their scriptoriums gathering dust as the world embraced uniformity over individuality. Yet illumination refused to die with a whimper. Like a candle flickering in a sudden draft, the art form clung to life in unexpected corners. Wealthy nobles, unwilling to abandon the prestige of handcrafted books, became the last patrons of this fading craft. The Medici family commissioned lavish manuscripts long after printing took hold, their gold-leafed pages serving as flexes of power as much as piety. Even kings got in on the act. The French court employed illuminators well into the 16th century, producing hybrid creations where printed text coexisted with hand-painted miniatures. These weren't just books, they were declarations that some things deserved to remain irreplaceable. Monasteries, too, kept the faith. In remote abbeys from Ireland to Austria, monks continued illuminating manuscripts not for practicality, but as acts of devotion. The Benedictines of Melk Abbey famously produced handwritten missals until the 18th century, their pages glowing with the same blues and golds their ancestors had used. For these scribes, the printing press wasn't a threat, it was irrelevant. Their work wasn't about efficiency, it was about preserving a sacred dialogue between hand, heart, and scripture. What's fascinating is how illumination didn't vanish so much as transform. The skills honed in medieval scriptoria resurfaced in new arenas. Heraldic manuscripts for royal genealogies, exquisitely painted scientific illustrations, even the intricate borders of early printed books known as incunabula. Illuminators became the first graphic designers, their eye for layout influencing everything from maps to playing cards. The golden vines that once framed gospel scenes now twined around almanacs and legal documents, proving that beauty and bureaucracy could coexist. This evolution holds a lesson about human creativity. When one door closes, artists don't stop creating, they find cracks in the walls. The same hands that once painted saints began illustrating natural history tomes or designing coats of arms. The pigments didn't fade, they just found new canvases. Even today, calligraphers and illustrators echo medieval techniques, whether they realize it or not. Every time a designer layers gold foil on a wedding invitation or a comic book artist crafts an ornate title page, they're channeling the ghost of some anonymous monk who refused to let practicality extinguish wonder. The printing press may have ended an era, but it couldn't kill the instinct that drove scribes to make words glow, the stubborn belief that some messages deserve to be delivered in light. While the age of monastic scriptoria has passed, the art of illumination refuses to fade into history. Across the globe, a passionate movement of artists and calligraphers has resurrected medieval techniques with near-archaeological precision. In quiet studios lit by modern LEDs rather than candle flames, practitioners grind lapis lazuli into ultramarine just as 13th-century monks did. painstakingly apply gold leaf with brushes tipped with a single squirrel hair, and prepare parchment using recipes lifted from medieval manuals. The Society of Scribes and Illuminators in London maintains a waiting list for its intensive workshops, where students spend months mastering the exact pressure required to create the hairlines of Carolingian minuscule script. Across the Atlantic, the Newberry Library in Chicago hosts annual vellum-making demonstrations that draw crowds fascinated by the transformation of animal skin into writing surface. What's remarkable about this revival is how deeply it engages with historical authenticity while making space for contemporary voices. Some illuminators create works that would make their medieval predecessors gasp: Bibles where saints hold smartphones, psalters with biblical scenes unfolding against city skylines. The St. John's Bible, a monumental handwritten project completed in 2011, features DNA double helixes twining through its margins and galaxies spiraling behind prophets. Yet every stroke adheres to techniques developed centuries ago, proving traditional methods can carry modern meaning. Online communities flourish where enthusiasts trade tips on sourcing quills, still best plucked from left-wing goose feathers, or troubleshooting gesso recipes. YouTube tutorials with titles like "How to Paint Like a Medieval Monk" garner hundreds of thousands of views, democratizing knowledge that was once cloistered in remote abbeys. The motivations behind this renaissance are as varied as its practitioners. Some seek spiritual connection through the slow, meditative act of copying sacred texts by hand. Others are drawn to the tangible satisfaction of creating art disconnected from digital screens where a misplaced stroke can't be undone with a keystroke. Many describe an almost mystical bond with historical scribes when they struggle with the same challenges: gold leaf tearing at the wrong moment, pigments drying too quickly, or the ache of a hand cramped from hours of detail work. The Walters Art Museum in Baltimore capitalizes on this fascination by offering Scribe for a Day programs, where visitors try their hand at illumination under expert guidance and invariably leave with newfound respect for medieval stamina. Perhaps most unexpectedly, modern science has become illumination's unlikely ally. Conservation labs using spectral imaging to study ancient manuscripts have uncovered long-lost techniques like the use of fermented garlic juice as a gold adhesive that contemporary artists eagerly adopt. Chemistry departments analyze medieval pigments, helping recreators avoid toxic materials while achieving historically accurate colors. Even the tech world has shown interest. A 2019 MIT project used machine learning to generate new, medieval illuminations based on digitized manuscripts, though purists argue the algorithm can't replicate the soul of hand-guided brushstrokes. This revival isn't just about preserving the past, it's about proving the enduring power of slow creation in an age of instant gratification. When a calligrapher spends 40 hours perfecting a single capital letter, they're engaging in quiet rebellion against disposable culture. The illuminated manuscripts emerging today may never grace cathedral altars, but they fulfill the same essential function as their medieval forebears, reminding us that some things are worth the time they demand. As one modern illuminator quipped while painstakingly burnishing gold leaf under a magnifying lamp, the 12th century had better lighting, at least their candles flickered. My fluorescent bulb shows every mistake, yet like those monastic scribes, she persists, ensuring that the glow of illuminated pages continues to cut through the darkness of the everyday. The word illumination did more than describe a technique, it captured an entire medieval worldview. In an era when churches glowed with stained glass and candles symbolized Christ as the light of the world, scribes believed their manuscripts literally transmitted divine radiance. Gold leaf wasn't just decorative, It mimicked the uncreated light of heaven, that same brilliance described by mystics in their visions. When a monk painstakingly burnished gold initials until they shone, he wasn't just crafting art, he was creating a portal for sacred light to pierce the earthly gloom. This symbolism ran deep. Some manuscripts even arranged text in patterns resembling stained glass windows, transforming pages into miniature cathedrals of parchment and pigment. The irony was profound. These purveyors of light worked in near darkness. Monastic scriptoria were often dim even at midday, their small windows designed more for insulation than illumination. Scribes strained their eyes under flickering candlelight, their bodies hunched like shadows against the vellum. Yet from this physical darkness emerged pages that seemed to generate their own ethereal glow. The contrast wasn't lost on medieval thinkers. Theologians like Hugh of St. Victor wrote of the darkness of the mind illuminated by Scripture, framing the scribe's labor as a microcosm of spiritual awakening. Even the tools reflected this duality: quills plucked from birds that soared in daylight, inks mixed from minerals drawn from the earth's depths, all harnessed to channel celestial brightness. This interplay of light and shadow extended to the imagery itself. Miniatures often depicted biblical scenes with dramatic chiaroscuro, angelic announcements bursting through Inkai night skies, or Moses receiving tablets amid divine radiance too intense for human eyes. The famous Winchester Bible shows prophets emerging from shadowy backgrounds as if stepping into revelation. Some illuminators heightened the effect by applying gold leaf beneath translucent paints, creating the illusion that figures were bathed in internal light. This wasn't mere artistic flair. It visualized a core medieval belief that divine truth wasn't found in blunt daylight, but in the tension between seen and unseen, known and mysterious. The manuscript's journey after completion deepened this metaphor. When a finished book was carried into a darkened church during Easter Vigil, its gold catching the first candle's flame, it became a liturgical event. The exultet scrolls of Italy were even designed with text and images upside down so congregants could witness the illumination as the deacon unfurled them. Private owners would read their psalters by candlelight, watching as the flicker brought saints' faces to life in the dancing shadows. In this way, every viewing reenacted the scribe's original act, wresting clarity from obscurity, one gleaming page at a time. Modern viewers often miss how radical this visual theology was. In a world where most people experienced scripture through oral recitation, illuminated manuscripts made the intangible tangible. They rendered divine light as something you could almost touch. A pilgrim unable to travel to Jerusalem could trace a finger over a gilded depiction of the heavenly city and feel, however fleetingly, that they stood in its radiance. That transformative power explains why so many manuscripts show signs of devotional wear: pages darkened by generations of hands, corners softened by reverent turning. The light they offered wasn't just seen, it was lived. And that's why scribes willingly sacrificed their sight, their health, even their sanity, not to make books, but to forge lanterns for souls navigating the long medieval night. The life of a medieval scribe was a paradox, a solitary existence devoted to creating works meant to connect others to the divine. Day after day, these men would retreat into the dim silence of the scriptorium, their world reduced to the rhythmic scratch of quill on parchment and the wavering circle of candlelight that barely kept the shadows at bay. Imagine the psychological toll of such isolation. No casual conversations to break the monotony, no sunlight to regulate sleep patterns, only the relentless pressure of perfection under the threat of costly mistakes. Modern psychologists would recognize the symptoms: chronic eye strain from squinting in poor light leading to headaches and dizziness, the lack of physical movement causing muscle atrophy and joint pain, the social deprivation fostering what we now call depression or anxiety. Some manuscripts even bear marginal notes that read like cries for help, "My hand trembles," "The night is long," or simply, "Why?" revealing cracks in the monastic ideal of serene devotion. Yet within this hardship bloomed extraordinary resilience. The very act of copying sacred texts provided a psychological lifeline, a structured routine that staved off despair through purpose. Each perfectly formed letter was a small victory over chaos, every completed page a tangible measure of progress in an otherwise unchanging existence. The Benedictine rule, which governed many monastic communities, wisely mandated balanced periods of work, prayer, and rest, creating a rhythm that likely prevented many scribes from spiraling into burnout. Some scholars speculate that the intricate patterns in Celtic manuscripts, those mesmerizing knots with no beginning or end, may have functioned as meditative exercises, their creation a form of active prayer that soothed anxious minds through repetitive, focused motion. The manuscripts themselves became mirrors of this psychological journey. Compare the erratic lettering and uneven spacing in a novice's early work to the confident strokes of a seasoned scribe's mature hand. You're seeing more than skill development. You're witnessing the gradual mastery of self. Some pages show abrupt shifts in style where a different monk clearly took over, hinting at moments when exhaustion or illness forced a scribe to step away. Others reveal ingenious coping mechanisms. A 15th century German psalter features tiny holes along its margins where the scribe pinned reminders to stretch or rest, while a Spanish manuscript includes a self-portrait of its creator napping at his desk, a wry admission of human limits. What's most profound is how these scribes transformed suffering into sublimity. The very pigments they used tell this story. The vibrant blues made from Lapis lazuli, a stone mined by slaves in distant Afghanistan. The reds derived from cinnabar, a mercury compound that poisoned those who handled it. Their art literally emerged from earthly struggle, yet pointed toward transcendence. When a scribe painted a golden halo around a saint's face, he wasn't just decorating a page, he was asserting that light could be wrested from darkness, that meaning could be forged from pain. The resulting manuscripts are more than historical artifacts. They're psychological documents, proving that even in the depths of isolation, the human spirit could create beauty that outshone its shadows. This legacy resonates unnervingly with our modern world of digital isolation and screen fatigue. Like medieval scribes, many today spend hours hunched over backlit rectangles, our eyes straining under artificial glow. Perhaps their example offers unexpected wisdom, not in romanticizing hardship, but in recognizing how structure, purpose, and small daily acts of creation can anchor us amidst loneliness. The next time you see a digitized page from an illuminated manuscript, look past the gold leaf to the faint quill marks beneath, the slight waver where the scribe paused to flex his fingers, the almost invisible tear stains near a difficult passage. These are the true illuminations, not the colors or the gilding, but the stubborn human presence that refused to disappear into the dark. The quiet scriptoriums of medieval convents, hummed with a creativity history almost forgot, where women, barred from pulpits and universities, wielded quills and pigments to shape spiritual vision. While monks dominated monastic production, nuns across Europe were crafting illuminated manuscripts of equal sophistication, their work often dismissed as mere devotional hobby rather than professional art. At the Abbey of Chelles near Paris in the 8th century, scribes like Gundrada produced Latin texts with flawless calligraphy, their initials blooming into gold-leafed vines. In Saxon convents, teams of nuns collaborated on psalters, dividing labor between rubricators, illuminators, and binders with the same precision as male scriptoria. These women didn't just copy texts, they innovated. The 12th century Hortus Deliciarum, created by Herod of Landsberg at Hohenberg Abbey, wove theology, science, and music into an encyclopedic masterpiece, its vivid miniatures depicting everything from philosophical diagrams to scenes of daily convent life. Noblewomen, too, left indelible marks on illumination, not just as patrons but as active participants. The exquisite hours of Jeanne d'Evreux, small enough to fit in a queen's palm, was commissioned by a French king for his young bride but bears subtle clues of female influence. The margins teem with unconventional scenes, women hawking, a nun teaching children, hinting at Jeanne's own input. Even more astonishing is the case of Christine de Pizan, the 15th century writer who didn't just commission manuscripts but directed their production, sketching layouts for illuminators to follow. Her City of Ladies, a radical text championing women's achievements, was illustrated with portraits of female scholars and warriors, visually reinforcing her argument that talent had no gender. Then there was Hildegard of Bingen, the polymath nun whose illuminated civias transcended mere decoration. Her swirling, hallucinogenic visions, towering figures with flaming wings, concentric heavens pulsing with divine light, weren't just illustrations but theological statements in pigment. Working in her Rhineland abbey, Hildegard likely guided the nuns painting her visions, blending her musical compositions, medical knowledge, and mystical experiences into a visual language unlike anything before. The vibrant greens and golds of her cosmic egg miniature didn't just depict creation, they invited viewers into the ecstatic trances that birthed her revelations. What makes these women's contributions extraordinary isn't just their skill, but their defiance of institutional barriers. Convents often had limited access to expensive materials, yet nuns improvised, stretching precious pigments with egg whites, repurposing worn-out manuscripts as palimpsests. Some, like the anonymous artist behind the Gutta Sintram Codex, inserted self-portraits into margins, a quiet rebellion against the era's erasure of female creators. Others encoded subversive messages in their choices. The Rothschild Canticles, likely created by Flemish nuns, frames biblical heroines like Judith and Esther as prominently as male saints. The legacy of these illuminators forces us to reconsider medieval creativity. For centuries, their work was attributed to monks or anonymous workshops, but close examination reveals telltale signs of feminine hands. The needle-fine brushstrokes in the Passional of Abbess Kunigund suggest someone accustomed to embroidery's precision. The herbal remedies painted in the Physica manuscript mirror the plant knowledge nuns cultivated in infirmaries. Even the color palettes sometimes betray female influence, soft pinks and lavenders made from crushed insects or berries, hues rarely prioritized in male-led commissions. These women didn't just illuminate parchment, they illuminated possibilities. In a world that declared them intellectually inferior, they mastered complex Latin, composed theology, and translated cosmic visions into gold and ink. Their surviving manuscripts are more than art. They're proof that the medieval mind wasn't exclusively male, and that the glow of creativity could pierce through even the thickest constraints of tradition. When we hold a convent-made psalter today, we're not just seeing a relic, we're touching the quiet revolution of women who wrote their way out of the margins. The staggering cost of producing an illuminated manuscript could bankrupt a modern small business. Each page represented a small fortune in materials alone. Consider the most extravagant ingredient, gold leaf, beaten so thin that a single ounce could cover over 200 square feet. This precious metal traveled from West African mines across perilous trade routes, passing through countless merchants before reaching European monasteries. Then there was ultramarine blue, ground from Lapis lazuli mined in Afghanistan's remote Badakhshan region. Transported by camel caravan to Venetian ports, this blue gold cost more than its weight in actual gold, with prices recorded at 35 ducats per ounce in 15th century Florence, enough to feed a family for months. Even seemingly humble materials carried hidden expenses. A single large manuscript might require the skins of 200 calves, each meticulously cleaned and stretched by specialists who commanded premium wages for their expertise. These economics transformed manuscripts into medieval status symbols as potent as private jets today. When French King Charles V commissioned a Bible in 1370, the payment record survived. He gifted the scribe an entire house in Paris plus an annual pension. English Bishop Robert de Lisle paid illuminators with parcels of fertile farmland rather than coin, creating dynasties of artist monks who passed both skill and property down generations. Some contracts specified payment in exotic spices or bolts of silk when currency was scarce, revealing how manuscript production plugged into global trade networks. The famous Vienna Genesis, with its sumptuous purple-dyed pages, used murex shellfish dye from Phoenician coasts, a color so associated with imperial power that Byzantine emperors restricted its use. This exclusivity reinforced a brutal medieval truth: knowledge was power and power cost money. Universities might boast libraries, but their books were utilitarian, unadorned texts chained to desks. True illuminated manuscripts belonged to princes and popes, displayed like crown jewels to awe visitors. The Burgundian dukes maintained traveling libraries of illuminated books as diplomatic tools, their lavishness subtly pressuring allies. Even the church hierarchy reflected this divide. While parish priests struggled with battered missals, the Vatican's treasury included gem-encrusted gospel books worth more than cathedral altars. Survival rates tell their own economic story. Of the estimated tens of thousands of luxury manuscripts created, perhaps 1 in 100 survives today. Wealthy owners could afford protective measures, climate-controlled chapels, iron-bound chests, even dedicated librarians. The priceless tres riches Hures survived the chaos of the French Revolution because its noble owner concealed it inside a false chimney. Meanwhile, humbler books deteriorated in damp parish churches or were recycled as binding scraps once their contents became outdated. Yet these economics also sparked innovation. Monastic scriptoria became early adopters of recycling. Parchment was too valuable to waste. Failed pages were scraped clean to create palimpsests, though traces often linger beneath. The Archimedes palimpsest famously preserved ancient Greek mathematics under 13th century prayers. Some convents developed faux illumination techniques, using tin mixed with saffron to mimic gold or cheaper azurite in place of lapis. Even mistakes were monetized. One enterprising Flemish workshop sold misprinted books as seconds to less discerning buyers, creating the medieval equivalent of discount bookstores. The legacy of these economic pressures remains visible in every surviving manuscript. The wear patterns on heavily used psalters show which prayers nobles favored, while pristine sections hint at pages too sacred for casual viewing. Marginal notes sometimes record transactions: a noblewoman's dowry paid in vellum, a scribe's complaint about delayed wages. These financial fingerprints remind us that behind every glowing page were very human calculations of cost and value, where spiritual aspirations collided with the medieval world's most pragmatic truth. Enlightenment came with a price tag, and that price was often paid in gold, land, and lifetimes of labor. The glittering pages of illuminated manuscripts didn't just attract devotion, they lured thieves, forgers, and black market dealers hungry for profit. In the shadowy corners of medieval Europe, armed robbers stormed monasteries not for sacks of coin but for bound volumes whose pages could fetch fortunes. One notorious incident in the 12th century saw a band of thieves break into Canterbury Cathedral, bypassing silver reliquaries to steal a jewel-encrusted gospel book only to dismantle it later, selling the gem-studded cover to one buyer and the vellum leaves to another. This wasn't just theft, it was cultural dissection, reducing sacred works to scattered body parts on the underground art market. Forgers seized the opportunity with shameless creativity. By the Renaissance, counterfeiters had perfected techniques to age parchment artificially, staining pages with tea or vinegar to mimic centuries of wear. One infamous 19th-century fraudster, the Spanish priest known as Don Vicente, produced dozens of medieval manuscripts complete with fake provenance tales claiming they'd been discovered in forgotten monastery vaults. His forgeries were so convincing they duped museums for decades. Their anachronistic details, like incorrect Latin verb forms or historically impossible pigments, only caught by scholars with microscopes. The scandal revealed a bitter truth: the hunger for these treasures outweighed caution, and greed could outpace expertise. Authentication became a high-stakes detective game. Historians now scrutinize every detail, from the weave of parchment fibers to the chemical signature of pigments. The British Library's conservation team once exposed a lost Chaucer manuscript as a clever fake when ultraviolet light revealed modern ink beneath the surface. Other red flags include inconsistencies in stitching patterns or tool marks that wouldn't match the era's bookbinding methods. Even marginalia can betray frauds. One forger slipped up by adding doodles of potatoes, a New World crop, to a manuscript supposedly created before Columbus sailed. Today's black market operates with alarming sophistication. In 2004, thieves stole 80 irreplaceable manuscripts from Stockholm's Royal Library by posing as researchers, smuggling the books out in briefcases over months. Many still haven't been recovered. Auction houses and private collectors sometimes unknowingly become conduits for stolen goods, their purchases laundered through layers of intermediaries. The FBI's art crime team estimates over 1,000 manuscripts remain missing worldwide, their pages likely scattered across continents, traded in whispers among wealthy collectors who care more about ownership than history. The true cost of these crimes isn't measured in dollars but in shattered connections to the past. Every dismembered manuscript severs a dialogue between eras, leaving scholars to piece together fragments like a puzzle with missing edges. When a forger's work enters a museum collection, it pollutes the historical record, sending researchers down false trails. Yet there's hope. Digital archives now preserve vulnerable manuscripts, while databases like Interpol's stolen works of art help track missing treasures. The battle to protect these luminous pages continues, a quiet war waged not with swords, but with X-ray fluorescent scanners and the stubborn dedication of those who refuse to let history be stolen twice. Digital technology has revolutionized our relationship with illuminated manuscripts, peeling back centuries with the swipe of a finger. High-resolution multispectral imaging reveals secrets hidden for ages, faint underdrawings where scribes sketched their visions, erased notes scribbled in margins, even traces of pigments long faded from view. The British Library's digitized Lindisfarne Gospels let viewers zoom in until individual brushstrokes emerge, exposing details even the monks who crafted it might have missed, like the minuscule dots of white paint used to animate saints' eyes with lifelike sparkle. Meanwhile, Stanford's Archimedes project employed X-ray fluorescence to decipher a 10th-century prayer book overwritten with ancient Greek mathematics, recovering lost theorems by a thinker dead for 700 years before the parchment was even scraped clean. Virtual reality takes this resurrection further, transporting users into reconstructed scriptoria where candlelight flickers across virtual desks. The Parker Library's Book of Hours VR experience lets you turn parchment pages with hand gestures, watching as gold leaf catches simulated sunlight streaming through stained glass windows that haven't existed since the Reformation. For fragmented manuscripts like the Charlemagne-era Dagolf Psalter, its pages scattered across Europe by Napoleonic looters, algorithms now stitch together digital facsimiles, reuniting separated folios in a way physical conservation never could. These aren't just fancy slideshows, they're time machines collapsing 800 years into the space between a headset and your eyebrows. Contemporary artists push boundaries further by fuming medieval techniques with silicon. California-based illustrator Angela Boyle uses Photoshop brushes modeled after squirrel hair quills to create digital illuminations for fantasy novels, her layers mimicking the translucent glazes of egg tempera. In Belgium, the Librarium project employs AI to generate new, medieval artwork trained on thousands of scanned manuscripts, though purists argue the algorithm misses the human imperfections that give hand-painted initials their soul. The most intriguing hybrids emerge from studios like Prague's Scriptura Moderna, where calligraphers ink letters on vellum before scanning them into 3D animation software, making dragons unfurl from initials as if alive on the page. This digital renaissance does more than preserve, it democratizes. Where once only kings and cardinals could handle a jeweled psalter, now anyone with a smartphone can explore the Morgan Library's collection in obsessive detail. Online communities dissect pigment recipes from high-res images, while YouTube tutorials teach gold leaf application using affordable synthetic alternatives. The irony is delicious. Technology's medieval scribes might have considered witchcraft now safeguard their legacy, ensuring that the glow of illumination no longer depends on candle flame or fragile vellum, but lives on in the cool, enduring light of pixels. The flickering candlelight that once danced across parchment pages has transcended its humble role as mere illumination. It's become a metaphor for the precariousness of human creativity itself. Imagine those monks hunched in the cold, their world reduced to the tiny circle of light cast by a single flame. Every stroke of their pens was a gamble against the dark, a defiance of the shadows that threatened to swallow their work whole. This wasn't just practical lighting, it was a spiritual battleground. The candle's flame symbolized divine inspiration, its wavering light mirroring the fragile nature of knowledge in an era when entire libraries could vanish in the smoke of war or neglect. Yet paradoxically, that same light was a hazard one careless moment, and years of labor could vanish in a shower of sparks. Modern conservation labs, with their climate-controlled cases and LED lighting, couldn't be further from those medieval scriptoria. Yet something profound is lost when we view these manuscripts under sterile museum lights. The gold leaf that once shimmered like captured sunlight now sits static under glass, divorced from the living flame that gave it meaning. Scholars have discovered that many illuminations were designed specifically for candlelight, their colors layered to deepen when viewed in flickering glow, their gold leaf angled to catch the flame's movement. The famous Winchester Bible's miniatures, for instance, use subtle gradations of blue that would have seemed to pulse like the night sky when seen by candle glow. These weren't just pretty effects, they were theological statements, visual representations of divine light piercing earthly darkness. The candle's duality, life-giver and destroyer, echoes the scribe's own struggles. Their pigments were poisons, their posture crippling, their eyesight sacrificed page by page. Like moths drawn to flame, they courted danger in pursuit of transcendence. We see this tension in the manuscripts themselves, charred edges carefully trimmed from near disasters, wax droplets fossilized in margins like amber. One particularly poignant example survives in Spain, a psalter with a blackened corner, its text abruptly ending mid-sentence. Forensic analysis suggests the scribe escaped a fire, returning later to add a note. God spared the work, but not the hand that made it. Contemporary artists have begun reclaiming this legacy. Calligrapher Patricia Lovett meticulously recreates medieval techniques by candlelight, documenting how the flicker affects perception of color and form. Her experiments reveal that certain intricate knotwork patterns, nearly invisible in daylight, become hypnotically clear in uneven flame light, proof that scribes mastered optics centuries before formal science explained it. Meanwhile, installations like Peter Vogel's shadow script project beams digitized manuscripts onto walls using candle-powered projectors, allowing viewers to experience the texts as their creators intended, alive with movement, vulnerable to the elements. This symbolism resonates far beyond art history. In our age of digital overload, the Candlelight manuscript stands as a rebuke to disposable culture. Every glowing screen delivers infinite, weightless knowledge, but the medieval scribe's work demanded physical sacrifice, each page weighted with time and peril. Perhaps that's why we still gather by candlelight for moments of reverence, whether in churches, memorials, or quiet dinners. The flame reminds us that some truths can't be fully grasped in the glare of efficiency, but only in the patient, precarious dance between light and shadow. The next time you see an illuminated manuscript in a museum, try this. Cup your hands around your eyes, blocking the overhead lights. For just a moment, you might glimpse what the scribe saw, not a relic behind glass, but a living thing, pulsing with the heartbeat of the flame that birthed it. The illuminated manuscripts of the Middle Ages are more than just books, they are mirrors held up to an entire civilization's soul. When we gaze at their gilded pages today, we're not merely seeing preserved artifacts, we're witnessing the collision of human ambition and fragility. Every stroke of vermilion red carries the tremor of mercury poisoning, each radiant capital letter, painstakingly burnished under candlelight, holds the ghost of a scribe's failing eyesight. These manuscripts were born from a paradox, objects of divine beauty crafted through earthly suffering, their very creation an act of defiance against the darkness pressing in from all sides. What makes them truly remarkable isn't just their survival, but what they reveal about the nature of creativity itself. The scribes who labored over them could have chosen efficiency, rushed copies, bare parchment, functional text. Instead, they pursued extravagance, layering gold where lead would suffice, grinding lapis lazuli into pigment when cheaper blues existed, dedicating months to a single page when weeks would do. This wasn't vanity, it was a declaration that sacred words deserved sacred vessels, that truth shone brighter when wrapped in splendor. In an age of plagues and wars, when life was cheap and time was scarce, they chose to make beauty permanent. Their legacy challenges us. In our world of disposable digital content, where words vanish into feeds and screens refresh endlessly, these manuscripts stand as monuments to slowness. They whisper that some things are worth the blistered hands and strained eyes, that real connection to ideas, to history, to the divine requires more than scrolling. When a medieval monk doodled a tired self-portrait in a margin, or a nun seared her prayers into pigment, they left proof that human hands, however imperfect, could touch eternity. So the next time you encounter an illuminated manuscript, whether in a museum case or a digital archive, pause. Look past the gold leaf to the faint quill marks beneath. Imagine the candles flicker across that page centuries ago, the ache in the scribe's shoulders as he worked through the night. These weren't just craftsmen, they were alchemists, transforming animal skin and ground stones into portals between worlds. And in that alchemy lies their greatest lesson. That light, however fragile, always finds a way to outlast the dark. If this journey into the heart of medieval creativity resonated with you, consider supporting our channel. Your likes and subscriptions help keep history's stories alive. Share your thoughts below. Which manuscript story moved you most? The poisoned pigments, the fire watchers in the scriptorium, or perhaps the women who painted their way out of obscurity? The conversation continues in the comments, where history always finds new voices.